Why do people dislike popular things? While at first this may seem like a simple question, the more I thought about it, the more I felt like a detective with a wall of photos and red string in front of me. Because it turns out there's a lot of different reasons why people don't like popular media. I think a wonderful example to look at when exploring this idea is Frieren Beyond Journey's End, which is incredibly convenient given the fact that I have a weekly series where I talk about that show. Welcome to Exploring Frieren. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about why some people hate the new #1 anime. An incredibly important asterisk to clarify right away is that this claim that Frieren is the #1 show in anime is based off of one specific criteria: its ranking on the popular forum MyAnimeList. In reality, the debate surrounding the #1 show in anime is incredibly complex and super subjective. I think there's numerous shows that people could make a case for that have much better qualifications for anime's best show than Frieren. But specifically on MyAnimeList, there's been one show that has dominated the #1 position for as long as I can remember. A show that's renowned, critically acclaimed, popular, and generally speaking held in high regard: Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. And while this show has been dethroned a couple times, it's always been a flash in a pan. It's never lasted very long. That is until now. Frieren is sitting above Fullmetal Alchemist by a huge margin. And while the comparison isn't exactly fair, given the fact that Frieren is a running series with one season and Fullmetal Alchemist is a finished product, I think there's still a lot to learn in analyzing why Frieren has maintained that #1 position when so many other shows have failed to dethrone Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Okay, a quick outline. This video is going to be broken up into 3 major parts. First, using general terms explaining why Frieren has taken over the #1 spot on MyAnimeList. Second, exploring a couple major reasons why people dislike popular media. And finally, the third part is going to be exploring why what makes Frieren so good also gives people the tools to hate it. Let's explore what it takes for any piece of media to hold the #1 position when it comes to online, community-based reviews. It's so far from a perfect system, but I do think it's one of the few relatively objective measurements of a product's quality. Should we take it as fact? Absolutely not, but I do think it's incredibly insightful when it comes to understanding how audiences feel about a piece of media generally. Now, there's 2 necessary components. The first is popularity, and the second is quality, which both apply to Frieren. This show is done really well. Everything from the music, writing, world building, directing, and animation is top notch. I think you can compare it to the best of the best when it comes to things like color theory and art style. But that's not the only factor that has led to Frieren's new reign. In reality, things like recency bias are incredibly important, because this show has the opportunity to be built off of the shoulders of giants. It's fresh in the viewers' minds, and more than anything, it hasn't had as many chances to mess up. But coming back to the first component I mentioned, which was popularity, for any show to maintain a top position, it needs to be relatively approachable. And while I do love shows like Ping Pong the Animation, and I wouldn't change much about anything they've done, their lack of approachability gets in the way of widespread mainstream popularity. And this definitely isn't even a bad thing. I love niches. That's actually what I'm trying to do here. And while it feels like they were very purposeful in the way they created that show, it is a little bit sad that it took me so long to find and then give it a chance. Which I think kind of leads to one of the reasons people dislike popular products. Because often there can actually kind of be a meta answer, something completely unrelated to the show itself. For example, someone's love of Ping Pong the Animation can lead to frustration that others aren't giving it a shot. So whenever they see popular anime that they think is significantly worse than this underappreciated piece of media, that comparison boils into frustration. It's easier to hate something that's popular when you compare it to something you love that isn't getting the attention you think it deserves. But there are also other meta factors, like identity. If a fan base for a popular series is cringe, you aren't going to want to associate with it. Independent of all the crazy things going down with Rick and Morty, the fan base in some ways ruined it first. So in an interesting way, popular media comes with a lot of baggage, because there are so many things beyond shows that influence your perspective of it. Which leads nicely into the next point, which is that saturation can ruin anything. Too much exposure to a good product will inevitably kill it, especially if that exposure is forced. People have grown to hate Hamilton and Frozen, both of which are products I initially enjoyed, and that frustration makes a lot of sense to me because they were so oversaturated. There was no avoiding it, so when you inevitably got annoyed, you have to deal with constant exposure to something that you now dislike, and that's not even accounting for the people that didn't really like it in the first place. There's widespread popular memes making fun of bands like Nickelback and Imagine Dragons, and while I don't think the music is outstanding, I do think the main reason they're hated, significantly more than the music they make, is because of how prevalent their music is. It's everywhere. There's a pretty good chance that even if you enjoy my videos, even if you feel like my analysis is insightful and thoughtful, if you were overexposed to them, it could very quickly start feeling like it was pompous and condescending. Hell, you might feel that way now, and I kind of get it. But also, I like talking about things, so, hopefully people don't feel that way. But the point is, oversaturation can ruin anything, even the best products. But I think ultimately one of the main contributing factors as to why people dislike popular things is because of expectations. There's that really famous quote that expectations are the bane of enjoyment, said by, I don't know, some person sometime. But the point being that if you come into any piece of media with high expectations, you'll raise the floor significantly on what's acceptable, and the ceiling will be less impressive. Because ultimately people are going to dislike things. Not all art is going to resonate. And when you feel disconnected from a piece of media but everyone else seems to like it, it's really hard to manage those emotions. We're incredibly susceptible to social pressures, and we want to feel secure and not feel very crazy for having opinions that vary from the general perception. I think primarily these factors and many other smaller ones contribute to a lot of people disliking popular media. It creates this pendulum effect where often things that are too popular will inevitably burn out. But sometimes popular art has staying power. So while not all good media is popular, and not all popular media is good, some things are good at being popular, while others are so good they are popular. Man, that was a mouthful. But let me explain. Why is pop music so often criticized for being bland and uninteresting? I like using this real-world market example from one of my organizational strategy classes in college. We looked at the beer industry and found that as people got better at making popular beer like Bud Light and Miller Lite, there became bigger niches and bubbles for people to establish specialty beers like brewing companies. Because if the singular goal of a product is to be as widespread as possible, inevitably the focal point will stop being about what makes the product good, and it will change to how can we prevent the product from being bad. And very often those two things actually have overlap. As much as I hate IPAs, the flavor is why people like them. Stouts are incredibly divisive. While some love it, others will avoid it at all costs. If you were to buy beer for a party with people you don't know very well, you would lean towards the generalist beer because it's safe. Because if people's goals are to access as big of a market share as possible, it'll inevitably lead to a nondescript, uninsulting product, which will be pretty bland. But not all popular things are mid. Some great pieces of media are underappreciated, but there are also others that are greatly appreciated. I love Billie Eilish's music, and I don't think what she's doing is bland. That's why I think a lot of people don't enjoy it. But you can look at things like the Beatles, or coming full circle, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. They're good and popular. But the thing about making a good product that is popular is it's incredibly hard to replicate. Making something that is good is hard enough, but understanding what will and won't resonate with audiences is a whole different, incredibly difficult challenge. So while good and popular is the ideal, so many brands chase bland products because it's more reliable. So coming full circle, I obviously love Frieren. Hell, I'm making a whole series about it. But funny enough, I didn't actually like the pilot. And if it weren't for my roommate pushing for us to watch it together, I would have taken a long time to actually come back to it, which I understand is not the general experience. That's part of the reason I made the 3-episode rule video just a couple weeks ago, because it took 3 episodes for me to really be sold on the show. Now, in retrospect, I hold the pilot in high regard. I think it's incredibly well done, and I understand why it resonates with people so much. But I do think the fact that it didn't initially appeal to me is kind of a perfect example of the whole point of this video. While I obviously think that Frieren is very well done, and even some of that was apparent right from the start, I didn't enjoy the pilot because it didn't resonate with me. In a lot of videos I've made, I've argued that the main purpose of art is to emotionally resonate. And while we can analyze the parts of art that side more towards the objective to better understand why art does or doesn't resonate with people, it will always be this enigmatic mishmash of factors that determines whether or not a piece of art resonates with any individual. I mean, any person can feel completely different about a song depending on the mood they're in. And while sometimes the complexity of resonance feels a bit nebulous, I don't think it's random. But I do think there's a reason why some of the best art throughout all of history is held in such high regard. I think there are products that are just generally better, but it's also okay if those products don't speak to you. When I saw the Sistine Chapel, I didn't really like it, but there's a reason so many people do. Those two opinions can coexist. And about the most objective thing we can measure in art is stats, which is why this community-based review system is valuable. It allows people to observe another factor that leans more towards the objective that'll help them make informed decisions. That's why I've spent so much time thinking about and trying to understand and talk through a My Anime List ranking. But coming back to that idea that art is made to resonate, Frieren is a show that is built around characters and their special moments, both big and small. It delicately and subtly builds towards these moments with remarkable care and execution, but a series that embraces subtlety that's also talked about with all sorts of hype will struggle to deliver on those great expectations. Frieren is a slow and deliberate show that builds towards special moments. It captures such a complex range of feelings, but to do that it has to take its time. So if for whatever reason those highly emotional scenes miss the mark for whoever's watching, the slow pacing offers little benefit, which is what it felt like to me. For some reason, unlike probably most of the people who are watching this series, I didn't feel a very strong emotional connection to the pilot. I just didn't care about the characters yet, and I think that they were made to seem at first very generic and cardboard. I think it ultimately leads to subversion and depth, but I don't know, it just for some reason didn't work for me. Because like I said, resonance is a little bit nebulous at times. I initially wasn't drawn to come back, because everything that made Frieren easy to dislike is also what made it distinct and special. The show to me felt so singular. It's doing something that I haven't really seen before, while also being deeply in touch and embracing so many of the tropes and norms it's subverting. And I feel like Frieren is just an outstanding show. And because of that, not despite it, I think lots of people have a great reason to hate it. Thanks for checking out the 10th video in exploring Frieren. If you've been enjoying this series, I've been trying to increase my subscriber count a little bit, so here's a reminder if that's something you're interested in. Thanks, I'll see you next week.